The UN predicts that we will reach peak humanity by 2083, but now more and more economists like University of Pennsylvania professor Jesus Fernandez Villaverde are saying that this UN prediction is actually far too optimistic. Instead, he argues that
So 2055 will be the year of peak humanity in size, and we will start going down.
if this is true, economies around the world will have to deal with pension crises, reduced economic growth, and potential government debt crises far faster than we thought. So, why are the UN predictions that everyone, including me, has been using so far so wrong? And what exactly does that mean for the global economy? As always on Money Macro, we have done a deep dive into the relevant economic research, taken the best arguments plus supporting evidence, and summarized them for you, starting with argument number 1: far fewer people are born today than the UN thinks. Have a look at this graph from Colombia, a country for which Professor Villaverde recently made the case that the UN is getting current birth rates terribly wrong. This line shows historical UN estimates for how many new Colombians are born in each year. Meanwhile, this line shows the actual births reported by Colombia's government. As you can see, the UN has roughly overestimated the total number of Colombians born by 30% for years. That's a big number, and we see similar gaps for other large developing countries like Turkey, Egypt, and more recently Mexico. In Mexico's case, the trend even flipped. For years, the UN underestimated births, but in the last couple of years, it started to overestimate them there as well. So why is the UN getting the total number of births for these major countries so wrong? The problem is not that UN researchers are using a bad methodology. You see, in many poor nations, governments genuinely do not have a good idea how many people are actually born. For example, in ultra-poor, unstable countries like South Sudan, Yemen, and Madagascar, of course, the government does not have the capacity to count all births. So it makes sense that the UN makes an estimate of how good the government is at counting baby and then adds to that a number of babies to account for these inaccuracies. The real problem, according to Villaverde, is that the UN itself classifies both Colombia and Turkey as countries with almost complete vital registration systems, at least according to this index of the UN's World Health Organization. That's really strange. The UN says the data is accurate, and yet it makes a massive correction by adding way more births than the government says, meaning that its population predictions for these countries will be way too high. And if this problem exists for medium-sized countries like Colombia or Turkey, imagine what it means for China, which alone accounts for nearly 1/6 of the world's population. Even tiny errors in Chinese birth statistics can shift global forecasts by tens of millions of people. The trouble is, though, that China's official data are amongst the most uncertain of all, and some demographers believe that the distortions here could dwarf everything else. Which brings us to our second reason of why humanity will shrink far faster than we thought: China's births can't be trusted. Specifically, Yi Fuxian, a demographer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, argues that China's population figures are probably significantly inflated. You see, in China, population counts are done by local governments. However, they have a very strong incentive to inflate their birth statistics before sending them to the central government. More babies, after all, means more money from Beijing for schools, pensions, and poverty relief. And as evidence for this, Fuxian gives the example that the regular numbers sent in by local governments in the year 2000 added up to 17.7 million births. However, the national census done that same year surprisingly only counted 13.8 million infants under 1, leaving a 12% gap. This problem will likely only get worse now that the Chinese government explicitly wants more kids and has pledged to reward local governments that can deliver. As evidence for this claim, Fuxian gave the example that when China introduced the two-child policy in 2016, the National Health and Family Planning Commission announced 18.85 million births, a 27% jump from just the previous year. And some provinces like Shandong and Zhejiang reported increases of 56 and 75% respectively. However, crucially, vaccine and school enrollment data showed no corresponding rise, giving us some pretty decent evidence that this baby boom was largely fabricated to make the policy appear successful. Yet, despite the evidence, China inflates its births, the UN does not take this into account, adding to the problem that the UN probably believes far more people are being born today than are actually born today. And yet, it gets even worse. So let's talk about the third and arguably most important factor which makes the accuracy of UN predictions so uncertain. But first, let me tell you about what I am really quite certain about, which is that my two kids really don't like to sit in the back of the car for very long. Which is a problem our video sponsor, Saily, a super convenient eSIM provider, has helped me out with a lot. You see, we like taking our kids to the mountains of Switzerland once a year, but given that Switzerland is not in the EU, I'd have to turn off roaming and my GPS when I drive into Switzerland next week. Search for a phone company, get a local eSIM with two screaming kids in the back. No thanks. This year I have installed Saily on my phone. Then I choose my data plan well before going on my trip for maximum comfort. And in this case I'm going to pick the Switzerland data plan, and now it says, got a coupon? Yes, I do. Money macro, and bam, there's my discount. Problem solved. Now I can just drive into Switzerland and keep driving straight to my hotel. And when I get there, I do not have to rely on public Wi-Fi to check the comments you guys are making under this video. And whenever I go somewhere else, I just know how it works. I open the Saily app again and get a new local SIM card. So if you are going abroad soon, do like me, download the Saily app and use the discount code MONEYMACRO at checkout for an exclusive 15% discount on all Saily eSIM data plans. And after you've done that, let's turn to the third reason why peak humanity may be closer than we thought. The UN is hopelessly optimistic about fertility bouncing back. Okay, have a look at this chart for fertility in South Korea. In the last decade, the number of babies per woman has relentlessly fallen from 1.2 to a staggering 0.7. Luckily, the UN thinks it will start bouncing back next year. And hey, that's actually the same year when both Europe and China's fertility will turn around as well. Similarly, after a relentless fall, the US's fertility will completely stabilize, starting next year. That seems absurd, doesn't it? Of course, the UN is not stupid. There is a reason for them to assume fertility will bounce back at some point. You see, in many of the most advanced Western countries like Germany, the US and France, fertility did actually bounce back when these societies adapted to provide better child care services and a better work-life balance for both working men and women. This led the UN to rely on the idea that fertility follows a three-phase pattern. In phase 1, the country starts with high fertility, and then in phase 2, as they develop and grow richer, fertility plummets. In this case, fertility levels off as it dips below replacement. And finally, in phase 3, fertility recovers slightly. According to the UN, China, the US and much of Europe should now be in phase 3, so they expect fertility to rebound slightly. But so far we haven't seen that. And because nobody knows exactly when this will happen, the UN just assumes the rebound starts right away. And that's why their projections often look so unrealistic. Although to be fair, the UN's past forecasts have actually been quite accurate on a global level. In 1968, for instance, the UN projected that the world's population in 1990 would be 5.44 billion, remarkably close to the actual 5.34 billion. Similarly, in 2010, the real global population was 7 billion, compared to earlier UN projections ranging from 6.8 to 7.2 billion. Not bad at all. Yet when it comes to recent birth forecasts in specific countries, especially rich or aging ones, the record of the UN is far less impressive. Take South Korea again. For years, the UN has predicted that fertility would stabilize or start rising. It never did. The same pattern appears in Chile and in Colombia. The UN has consistently overestimated birth rates and underestimated the speed of the decline. So in this light, these UN predictions seem incredibly naive. And it's not just skeptics like Professor Villaverde who think so. other major forecasting groups like the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation expect global population to peak around 2064. Now it gets worse. The Vienna-based IIASA puts the peak even earlier, around 2080. And finally, according to The Economist, if current fertility trends continue for just another 25 years, humanity could already peak by 2065, nearly 2 decades earlier than what the UN expects. This means all the alarming analysis that you've seen about a global economic slowdown and potential pension crises could come far quicker than we thought. So, what does this mean for the global economy? Luckily, as I mentioned in my previous analysis, the answer is not all bad. Some regions, like for example India and later Africa, may actually be heading for a potentially great economy, given that they will experience what economists call a demographic dividend. Thanks to a currently relatively young population and fewer births, these countries will enter an era where they have a large population of people who work, compared to both the number of old people and the number of children who cannot work. For example, this is the demographic pyramid of India, where you can clearly see a large bulge of young people who recently entered the workforce. Africa, on the other hand, is still decades away from that turning point. Right now, high fertility means lots of children and a heavy dependency burden, which keeps growth potentially limited. But around 2050, as fertility rates fall and the working age share of the population expands, Africa could become the world's next major growth engine. But as you can see here in Europe, China and Japan, their population pyramids look drastically different. This bulge of workers will soon leave the workforce, meaning fewer and fewer workers will actually be economically productive. As mentioned in my previous video, this will likely lead to Japanification of all major economies in East Asia and Europe, which means slower economic growth and higher government debt. As the population crisis intensifies, we will see more and more countries hit a government debt limit that either will result in a debt crisis or a cut to pension benefits. This will have major implications for the global balance of power, as Japan and Europe decline first, while China and the US will follow suit a bit later. And as a consequence of the same trend, India will see its power increase first and then decline, as Africa gets the demographic advantage. These conclusions still stand. However, thanks to the new data presented in this video, many dates in my previous analysis will change. Specifically, in that video I mentioned how China's demographic backlash will come later, but it will be very severe. The fact that China has for a long time misrepresented birth statistics, though, may mean that it will follow the path of Europe and Japan sooner. But more importantly, as we've seen here, given the relentless fall of fertility in recent years, the global population crisis will just come sooner everywhere and will likely be more severe than we previously thought. But yeah, that's my take. What do you think? Have I been too harsh on the UN, or do you agree that there's really strong evidence that the world's population will start falling far faster than we thought? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, if you are traveling abroad soon, download Saily and use our discount code to keep your phone charges low. This also helps out the channel, as it increases the chances that sponsors will keep sponsoring our videos.